Have you ever felt like somebody was watching you in the woods? While walking, did you hear the distant patter of leaves? Or maybe even the crack of a stick? Somewhere from the darkness, just beyond your vision. Welcome to Dark Tent Tales, where we share hair-raising, spooky stories that are sure to stoke the flames at your next campfire. Our story tonight comes from a former college roommate of mine. We'll refer to him as Dave. One fall evening, Dave was out hunting in a notorious stretch of wilderness in the northernmost reaches of the state of Maine. That night, he came face to face with something so terrifying, it haunts his dreams even to this day. So come along with us as we tackle the story of the hunter becoming the hunted. This is the story of the Burntlands Stalker. At the tippity top of the northeastern U.S. state of Maine lies Aroostook County, known to Mainers as simply the county. This picturesque region holds the distinction of being the largest county east of the Mississippi River. It's so large, in fact, you could fit the states of Connecticut and Rhode Island within its lines. Despite its size, very few people actually live there, with only its eastern third being permanently inhabited, and sparsely at that. The people here have two industries: agriculture and logging. The region once boasted a higher yield of potatoes than even Idaho, though several factors, including population decline and the corporatization of agriculture, have led to fewer farms and thus lower yields. The forests of the county are vast, and have spawned many myths and legends among the loggers of yesteryear. Several of these patches of timberland have gained a sinister reputation, with no shortage of reports of paranormal activity. Though you won't find it written on any map, one of these allegedly haunted forests is known by the locals as the Burntlands. This 20-mile wide block of woods sits between the two principal north to south roads, connecting the region to Maine's only interstate. It is filled with gentle hills forming small valleys, and is dotted with gravel logging roads, allowing easy access for off-road capable vehicles. It is free to use, making it a busy place during hunting season. Due to its seclusion, it is also a favorite place among the local teenagers to party, far away from the prying eyes of the law. Nestled within one of these valleys was a particularly creepy place Dave and his friends referred to as the Maze. There was only one road into or out of it, and the tangled mess of dead-end roads crisscrossing around the various clear-cuts made it very easy to get lost. One thing was for certain, though. Even during hunting season, you didn't see very many people in the maze. At the end of deer season in 2010, Dave had been out driving the roads in the maze, looking for a place to set up a tree stand the following year. While driving at walking speed looking for tracks along the edge of the road, something in the ditch caught his attention. Laying there in the sad, lonely ditch, in this place at least 10 miles from any paved road, was a battered and faded-looking wooden cross. Laying next to it were two picture frames, one of a young man and the other of a young mother holding her baby. Dave thought it was creepy, sure, but he was unperturbed. He'd mentioned it to friends and coworkers, but no one seemed to know offhand of an incident that might be associated with it. He shrugged it off, and in the following autumn, he constructed a homemade tree stand and placed it along a promising-looking skidder trail deep within the maze. He'd had to work the morning of opening day for deer season. When he got out of work, he'd rushed back to his dorm to don his hunting clothes and head out into the woods. It was a warm afternoon in late October, a perfect day. Warm enough to not have to bundle up, but not so hot as to hinder deer movement. He was halfway to the maze when he'd realized that he'd forgotten his flashlight in his haste to get ready. No matter, he thought. Dave was an experienced outdoorsman, and he knew that he couldn't get lost as long as he didn't leave the trail. Dave pulled up and backed into the dead end of the road the skidder trail was on, and stealthily made his way out to his tree, rifle in hand. He tucked himself away high in his tree and got comfortable. As he took in the eerie beauty around him, he was mesmerized by the calming sounds of the forest. Songbirds chirped as they playfully sprung from branch to branch. It hadn't got too cold in the evenings yet, so there was still the buzz of insect noise. A gentle breeze wisped the brilliant array of colorful leaves from their trees, falling steadily to the ground. After about an hour, the tranquility was suddenly broken by the distinct patter of feet on leaves. Something big was approaching from behind Dave. As it grew nearer, he remained still, not wanting to alert the animal by turning around to look. His heart pounded out of his chest as he thought, "This is it, my first big buck." As the animal came to view, however, his excitement had turned to pure disappointment. It was big, all right. Too big. Standing there before him was a hulking bull moose, the biggest he'd ever seen. The problem was that Maine was very strict with its moose tags, and though Dave had entered every year, he'd never been picked in the state's annual moose lottery. The animal of a lifetime was standing before him, and all he could do was watch. He couldn't even take a picture of it, for he left his phone in the truck. With no signal for miles around, he didn't even think to bother with it. The moose milled around his tree for what seemed like an eternity, almost as if it was taunting him. Every now and then it seemed to look back at him, before returning to its lazy patrol of the woods. It took so long for the animal to move on that night had begun to fall. Dave patiently waited the animal to move on before climbing down, as bull moose around the time of the rut can become highly aggressive and territorial. Once he was sure that the moose was gone, Dave climbed down the creaky ladder of the tree stand. With his feet firmly on the ground, he'd begun to notice an unnerving silence about the woods that hadn't been there before. There were no crickets, and the gentle breeze had vanished. There was just enough moonlight to see the silhouettes of the trees along the edge of the trail, and the silence was quite literally deafening. All Dave could hear was the muffled ringing of his tinnitus, and the sound of his own blood flowing through his head. He gripped his rifle tightly as he began the dark walk back to the truck. It wasn't long before he could hear faint noises on the edge of his periphery. Thinking that they were just the echoes of his own footsteps, he stopped, and there was once again silence. He proceeded once more, but once again felt the paranoia of peering eyes ripping through him. He stopped again, only this time there was the distinct crack of a snapping branch somewhere in the darkness. He turned towards the noise, shaking as he flipped the safety off on his rifle. Wah! Hoping to scare the unknown beast away. But he was returned with a very low growl. His heart pounding, he squeezed the trigger and sent a bullet hurtling into the night, the fireball illuminating his surroundings like the flash of lightning. His assailant was not shaken, and after racking the bolt to chamber another round, he could hear the pitter-patter of feet on leaves. Dave turned and ran, trying hard to keep his footing in the uneven ruts and twisted tree roots jutting up from the skidder trail. Between his own heavy breathing, he could hear the snarl of the creature behind him. It sounded like no animal he'd ever heard before, and it never got closer or further away from him. It was almost as if the creature was keeping pace with him, almost in a sort of sick game. He'd even tripped over a rotted stump sticking out of the trail, but he'd managed to get back on his feet despite one of them throbbing. As he reached the road, he turned back towards the truck in a full-on sprint, with the help of the now even and firm ground of the gravel road. He didn't know how, but he'd made it back to the truck alive. He threw his rifle in the seat and slammed the door behind him, slamming the pin to lock it with his elbow on the way in. Barely able to breathe, he fumbled with the keys, starting the engine as fast as he could. He slammed the shifter into first gear and flipped on the headlights. His heart skipped a beat when he realized that the creature was standing upright in the road just in front of his truck. It had a pale, twisted-looking frame with wiry strands of white, wispy hair. Its ears were pointed, and its inhuman face cast an overwhelming cloud of dread over Dave. He sat there entranced, unable to move while locked in a stare-down with this glowing-eyed, demented-looking being. One last spike of adrenaline had hit him, and he was able to dump the clutch and mash the accelerator. The tires kicked up gravel as they spun out, finally grabbing and rocking the truck forward towards the creature. In a flash, it bolted out of the way, but Dave could hear a horrible scraping sound as he flew past. In his rear view, he could see the creature reflecting in the red glow coming off his taillights as its pale and twisted body chased him into the darkness. Dave hit the road leading out of the maze, flying across the potholes and washboard that sounded like they were rattling his truck to pieces. He didn't stop until he got back to town, where he pulled into a gas station to collect himself. When he got out, he examined his truck and found several gnarly scratches running down its side. It looked as if he'd brushed up against a tree at a high rate of speed, but he knew that this must have been the horrible scraping noise he heard as he drove past the creature. Dave was so shaken by this encounter, he didn't hunt again for the rest of the season. He also never returned to get his tree stand, and it's likely still there to this day. As for the maze, the following spring, the road going in had washed out beyond repair. Given that the area had been cut within the previous decade, it's unlikely that the road would be rebuilt for some time. Dave speculated that the creature might have just been protective of its territory, as it likely could have caught him if it had truly wanted to. Perhaps, if it was seclusion the beast was after, it's gotten it, an ear sense. So what do you think? Is there a pale cryptid stalking the woods of Northern Maine? Or did a college student, under too much pressure, have a panic attack that was filled in by a colorful imagination? If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please do us a favor and hit that like button. It'll help to share this story with other fans of the dark and the spooky, just like yourself. And if you don't want to miss our next story, please be sure to subscribe and make sure you hit that notification bell. This has been Dark Tent Tales. Go carefully, my friends.